Okay, everyone. Good evening. Um, I have no idea how many people are actually in the room, but good evening to someone. It's so good to be back with you all. Happy New Year. Um, Happy second impeachment. It just seems like, we just did the first impeachment just, I don't know, last year, so time flies. Um, but yeah, 2021. So, um, I oh Happy New Year as well. I don't think I've said that yet either. But it's so funny. This year I didn't really um, celebrate, or really I observed it, but I didn't really celebrate New Year's because for me it's just I don't know. I didn't want to get into this whole thing around believing that um, like the year changing, like this artificial changing of a year was somehow going to be different. Even though I do believe in the power of beginning again, right? Always beginning again over and over and over again as much as possible. Um, but I just, the work is the work. The work continues regardless of what's new and what's old. Um, so, such a weird phrase to say Happy New Year, um, considering all of that as well. So, but anyhow, tonight, yeah, yeah, this is a tough period. We're all moving through a lot. Last week, for me, I was moving through a lot of stuff coming up for me, a lot of trauma, and a lot of old energies and histories, and I was very grateful for practice, very grateful for practice. I was very grateful for um, for the years that I've spent struggling to understand really the nature of my mind, the nature of my emotions, how to hold space for everything. I think it was Bruce Lee. It was Bruce Lee who said this, and I paraphrase this quote from him, but he said that in crisis, people don't rise to their expectations, they fall to the level of their training. Um, I think Reverend Angel has said that too in the past before. Um, but I have found that to be the absolute truth that in times like this, like many of us have these great expectations to somehow transcend, the suffering of the relative world and the relative body, and perception. But really, in truth, what happens is that the level of our training, the level of our practice is actually what's rising to meet us. And for many of us, we don't have a lot of practice with this. We haven't been able to do a lot of this really important work for ourselves. So in these moments, in these periods, it feels as if we're being, I guess, in a way, dropped. We're being let down, right? Um, as I, you know, was coming up, in my lineage, one of the things that was the hardest to do in the practice was to practice when times were great, when times were good. When you're feeling great, it's really hard to practice. Um, I think the practice of sympathetic joy is one of those practices that um, is really skillful to like do when you're feeling great, you know. Um, but in times where you're just really spacious and open, and and everything's going great, it's like it's hard to maintain a really diligent practice. And coming up again in the lineage, one of the things that we had to train through was to train through the good times, right? When everything was great, because the training in the good times is actually what creates the conditions for us to be held during the difficult times, during the crisis. It's difficult to really to start a practice during crisis. It's you know I offer another example from the time I spent as a chaplain. I'm a hospital chaplain. I only spent a year doing formal chaplaincy work. Lama Justin has spent years and years doing it, but I only spent a year. But that was so transformative for me. And I had it was a really interesting privilege of being able to sit with people at the time of their death. And it was really bizarre for me in my cohort of chaplains, chaplains who were in training, how I tended to get to have this privilege of sitting with a lot of people at the moment of death. I think in that year, I sat with about 7 people, or I was present for the transition of about 7 people. And that was, I call it a privilege because to have this experience of sitting with folks at the moment of the transition is the most vulnerable experience of someone's life, right? Transitioning out of life is the most vulnerable, tender experience that we could possibly have. And for someone to be able to be there in that space, to hold space for that transition, is this tremendous teaching for the living. And having had that experience 7 times in that period of training, what I began to see was that, even in that moment, during the process of dying wasn't the time to start preparing for death, if that makes sense. That in the moment of transition, in that experience of transition, it was really hard to start a practice, right? Of holding space, and moving through what that process can be for people, and I think the dying process is informed personally by whatever a person's, spiritual beliefs, paradigms were in life, right? I think our belief systems influence how death expresses itself in its symbols, and its motifs, and its narratives, and so forth, right? And Tibetan Buddhism, where I've been trained, has a particular kind of narrative that informs how Tibetan Buddhist practitioners transition. But regardless, it still takes training. And I think when we talk about Buddhism, Buddhism is often explained as the practice for death. Like Buddhism is where we're practicing for death, right? Though we may say that we're practicing to obtain enlightenment and realization, we understand that the best time for us to experience that realization, that enlightenment, is actually at the moment of death, of transitioning, of moving out of the physical body, moving into a more energetic expression, which we would say consciousness, right? So our consciousness actually lets go of the body and moves into a purely mental state, right? Where whatever we've been informed by creates a reality of transition for us, moving through that space. But even in Tibetan Buddhism, we say, we need a lot of practice to even manage that. It's more than just having an experience that seems familiar. It's also having the practice in life that helps us to meet those symbols with a sense of openness and a sense of stability and a sense of familiarity. But we can argue that we're always dying, right? Every second is a birth and a death, right? We're constantly letting go of the person that we used to be. Our old selves are dying second after second, and then the work, therefore, the practice in the moment is to let go over and over and over again. That rod is a very different rod now than what I was, at the beginning of this talk, right? And to bring to that basic practice a deep sense of saying, yeah, and I'm a different person now, right? And taking advantage of that change. Many of us, it's hard for many of us to experience that letting go. Um, that I'm a different person than I was 5 minutes ago. And I want to take advantage of that, right? Because this new person is full of potential to be less violent, right? To be in less suffering, to be in less despair than they were. That's, when I talk about practice, that's really ultimately what I'm talking about. It's like, how do we bring this energy of letting go over and over again to each second that we're moving through, right? And how do we come to the end of our lives and say that this is just another kind of letting go, or not even another kind of letting go, it's just letting go again. It's letting go of the person that I used to be, and then transitioning, into something new, right? To something much more spacious and open and freeing, right? Often it's understanding that the that there's it's understanding that, like, the seconds, the hours aren't all different from each other. Like, this is every second is really the same second. Every hour is really the same hour. Um, because we may say, okay, but in this second, like, it's just a lot going on, and the last second, there wasn't a lot happening. But still, the basic core practice is to hold everything in the spaciousness and to let go, to disrupt the fixation that we have um, on that moment, you know. I think sometimes we forget this. I think we forget this basic practice because what's coming at us is so intense, and we say, "Oh, but this is different. This is so completely different in the last second. How do I practice with that?" Well, you practice with it the same way you practice with the last second. You know, yeah, it may take a little more energy, right? There may be more energy coming, so it's going to be a little more energy exerted to push through it, to cut through, or to rise it, but it's still the same practice of letting go, of moving through, you know. This is why, going back to the beginning of what I mentioned earlier about New Year's and transitioning and all of that, I just, it's just the same thing over and over again. It's just another year. And it's so arbitrary, Western Roman calendar is so arbitrary, even to begin with. Um, but it's just seeing, as Lauren Hill said, everything is everything, right? So, like, 1 second is just like the other second, right? This past second will be like every future second, over and over again. There's no difference, you know. And this also introduces us, really into the teaching of one taste, which is the teaching of seeing everything, um, or this, well, we would say this enlightened view, rather. So this one taste enlightened view really means that, like, we begin to tune in, to resonate, to begin to see the nature of everything, as this coming together of emptiness, space, and what I call potential, or energy. Um, so give me 1 second. I'm take. There's something. 1 second. I'll be right back. All right, sorry everyone. I had a little bit of an interruption at the door that I had to take care of. So this sameness, right? This Buddha nature, this one taste. Again, like this is the basic practice that we're trying to cultivate, or trying to bring into everything that's arising for us over and over and over again. Even looking at what's happening in the world now, political stuff, the pandemic still is getting even worse, right? And then there's us, right? Then there's our personal lives, and there's the personal things that we're experiencing, and all of that seems overwhelming. And then what we're bringing into this as a practice, as an intervention, is this contemplation that all the stuff that I'm experiencing, the nature of it is just space, it's emptiness, it's energy, over and over again. There's nothing that isn't this coming together of space, emptiness, energy. And I often say emptiness and space together. Because sometimes for me, emptiness is a different. Emptiness conveys a certain quality, but space for me happens to open that quality up even more, if that makes sense. Because we don't necessarily have a felt experience of emptiness initially, but we can have more of a felt experience of what space is, right? So I bring emptiness and space together to offer this energy of what it means to be open, to be wide open. That there's space, and that space is just completely clear. It's completely expansive. There's no limits. There's no borders, right? That spaciousness, right? That emptiness, we would say, is the expression of the mother in its context, right? So to turn our minds into spacious emptiness really is to turn our minds into the mother, the expression of the mother. And it feels really uncomfortable because it doesn't feel initially like something holding us. It doesn't feel like there's something just wrapping its arms around us, but it's this experience of freedom, this wide openness, right? It feels like free falling, maybe, in a way, right? And that emptiness space holds everything, but that space emptiness is also the nature of everything at the same time. And I think initially, when we're really getting into this practice, we're saying, okay, whatever arises is being held by this space emptiness. But over time, what we're trying to do is penetrate the nature of all phenomena and beginning to understand that, like, even the phenomena itself is space emptiness. We're able to identify something as a phenomena, as a phenomenon, because of the energy quality, the suchness of space emptiness. That energy is what gives rise to this illusion of somethingness, a phenomenon, phenomena, right? And so we're trying to work our way through this in the practice. We're trying to not only turn our minds, our attention into the space emptiness, we're trying to turn our minds into the space emptiness of phenomena, at the same time understanding that there's this energy that's also permeating, evading space emptiness as well. Suchness is sometimes we would call it in the literature, suchness. That there isn't this complete emptiness, like emptiness can be very nihilistic and very cold, very cutting, very finite, But when we talk about the energy, the suchness, potentiality, or in Tibetan Buddhism we say luminosity, also like this potential, this energy is also pervading everything. Of course, in Tibetan Buddhism, the connotation is light. It's like there's light within the emptiness. I would say there's just this energy, that in this emptiness, there's perhaps this energy. For me, that energy may feel like warmth. There's a warmth within this emptiness. It's like think about eggs or something. Maybe that's not the best example, but like, you take eggs, and you scramble eggs. You crack the eggs in a bowl, scramble them, they're liquid, and then you heat them up, and they get solid. And I think sometimes that's how I can understand this energy within emptiness. Like this energy is just pervading emptiness space, but then it gets moved around, irritated, excited, right? Then it begins to form things, and it gets solid, right? You start getting your eggs scrambled. You end up with an omelet. You end up with a hard-boiled egg, right? You end up with eggs Benedict. You end up with sunny side. You end up with a fried egg, whatever it may be. Apparently I'm hungry tonight. But the point is, right, that energy gets stirred through something, right, and then it starts becoming phenomena. Now, of course, there's a whole range of things to say about, okay, what is it that stirs it up, right? What gets the energy moving and excited to start creating things. There's so much around that particular point, but I'm not gonna necessarily get into that tonight. That's gonna take me off in another direction, but just staying with this whole idea that, this energy gets excited, it gets moving, gets manipulated, things begin to happen. Things begin to firm up and get solid. Then you have realness. Then you have ego and things and you and me and mine and yours, and all of that begins to come about in a way. And that, if we don't have perspective in what the true nature of this phenomena is, then everything just feels like a cage. It feels, we feel bound. It feels like a prison. We feel trapped, really. We feel trapped. And I would argue that a majority of beings actually feel trapped by life, trapped by phenomenal reality, because we actually don't have the practice to really understand the nature of phenomenal reality itself. So everything is just real, which is which is being trapped by phenomenal reality is sorry, I got really distracted. Some energy just passed through. So getting trapped by phenomenal reality is what many of us are experiencing, because we haven't developed the practice to actually unlock phenomenal reality through basically our meditation practice, to see the nature of things opening. So that's the opposite end. Like, there's nihilism, this emptiness, this deadness, this coldness, and you go to the other extreme, which is materialism, which everything's real, right? And that's also nihilism, materialism, both are really extremist views that actually trap us, you know. And it's hard to be hopeful when you're trapped by those extremist views. It's hard to say that there is something liberatory when you hit those extremes. Um, we talk about the Heart Sutra. The Heart Sutra is yet another way that we can talk about this, because the Heart Sutra is really about extremes, right? It's saying that, like, it's not true that nothing exists, and it's also not true that everything exists. But what is true is the middle, is that there is and there ain't. There is stuff happening at the same time. There isn't stuff happening, right? Bringing both of those extreme ideas, beliefs together creates the truth. It's both, right? It's both happening and it's not happening. And to sit within the contradiction of that teaching, so it's like the way these two teachings, these two extreme teachings actually collide together. And the way they collide together, we have to sit in that collision and feel the impact of those extremist views coming together. And that impact, that energy, is what startles us, and that begins to disrupt us from fixating on the realness of everything, but it also disrupts us in how we fixate on the emptiness of everything. So basically, the rug gets pulled from under us, and there's no way to stand up. We're completely disrupted. And to live in that energetic teaching as much as possible is the teaching, is the practice itself. And that's going to propel you into a really, I would say, countercultural way of being, way of living. Where you're really going to be intimately moving through contradictions in a way that will be hard to explain, to communicate to people. And the consequences of that, living in the world, as someone going through that teaching, living through the world, is that people will look at you and say, what the fuck is wrong with you? What is your problem? What's your deal? Because you don't make sense. You don't make sense. You may say one thing and do another thing. And sometimes for instance, sometimes your political beliefs, this is more specifically, maybe your progressive political beliefs don't always communicate, sometimes as progressive, right? You may do certain things that may actually contradict what you say you believe. And this is the teaching of complexity, which is, for me, which was a teaching that I got directly from Reverend Angel, who, helped me to really see that. So she helped me to see, using her life as an example, that, yeah, someone can be this and that, right? Someone can be both A and B, but does that make them untrustworthy, right? Does that mean that they have less integrity, right? Because they're serving all these different perspectives, these different ways of being, So, looking at what we're experiencing right now in the world, the trauma, the chaos, the everything, you know, um, when we have a sense of the nature of things that's arising for us, right, in the ways that we've been talking about, then that should be the basis for developing compassion, a deeper compassion for others as well. When you realize what's happening, or when you have an inkling of what's happening, you say, oh, okay, this is what's happening. And a lot of beings are trapped, in this belief system. How do they get free if it's not for the work that I can do to help to free them? So I was talking with Sister Sadada recently, and then she asked, so why does a bodhisattva keep coming back to help people? Like, if a bodhisattva understands the nature of things, wouldn't they just get the hell out of here? What makes a bodhisattva is that, yes, there is a recognition of the nature of things, and secondly, there is this realization, there's this intentionality where the bodhisattva takes responsibility for the collective, because the bodhisattva has realized that there is a kind of unity, a kind of sameness, a connection between themselves and all other beings. That they through this recognition of emptiness and space and energy, you begin to see that you're simply just a reflection of other beings, and other beings are a reflection of you. So to help other beings actually means that to help other beings means that you're helping yourself, and to help yourself means that you're helping other beings. Your liberation is tied into the liberation of other beings, because you understand that you are other beings. And that's what pulls the bodhisattva. It's the saint, the Buddhist saint, the spiritual saint, into liberation work, to free beings. And that liberation work is quite skillful as well. I think there are many bodhisattvas working in the world doing things in such a skillful way that you have no idea. It's quite complex. It's really complex. And what has helped me in my practice is to move deeper into that complexity in ways that may seem really uncomfortable. But this is what we're trying to do in the practice, is we're intentionally choosing discomfort, because that discomfort is where liberation happens. Liberation doesn't happen in comfort. Just like we say that you can't grow in risk, like for your therapists, right, and mental health professionals, right? Risk is where we grow, we evolve. We don't grow in comfort when everything's cool. We get challenged, and then we get resilient, and then we begin to grow, and figure out who and what we are in the face, of impermanence, of change, So let's just practice with this, really. Just do a little bit of practice. We're not going to sit for very long. And then we'll have any questions. If there are any questions, that can be it for tonight. But so beginning the practice, again, this is going to be maybe 10 or 15 minutes. But just getting ready, coming to a position. that feels appropriate for you in this moment. And let's start with just generating some gratitude. Or actually, let's take a step out of that for a second and just start with intentions. I encourage you just to think about your intentions for practicing. Like, why are you practicing? This is always important to start any practice, no matter how long or formal it is. Just for just a few seconds, just saying, this is why I'm practicing now. I'm practicing to, whatever is appropriate for you. For me, I'm practicing to experience spaciousness and openness in order to help others to experience the same. Right? And then transitioning. Let's transition into a gratitude practice. And this can be a gratitude and or a devotion practice for those of us who have a devotion practice. So in gratitude, we're just reflecting, on what we're grateful for. And that can mean that we're reflecting on the kindness or the labor that we receive from others in order to be well. And for me, it's countless, overwhelming labor and kindness from beings that I don't even know, or register, that are part of me surviving. Allowing that energy of gratitude to awaken. And if you have a devotion practice, in our devotion practice, we're reflecting on our teachers and our guides, mentors and elders and so forth. These beings who have been kind enough to offer us liberatory teachings, reflecting on their kindness, reflecting on the kindness of their teachers who taught them, and so forth and so on, that you're a part of the continuum, a lineage, giving rise and opening to this deep gratitude for that. Just sitting with this for a bit, like really getting into this, because right now it's so easy for us to get lost in everything else, and the critique and the criticisms and the skepticisms and all of that. Come back to this basic practice of recognizing the gratitude and the devotion. So regardless of what's happening in the world, there are beings who are trying to save us. So, allowing this energy of gratitude to really awaken, beginning to feel your whole experience of both body and mind. So often I say, what does it feel like? What is your experience of being held by this energy of gratitude or devotion? So we're just going to go through just like our basic snow practice, or my snow practice, which is seeing, naming, owning, experiencing, letting go, letting float. But starting at the top, so just turning our attention, just beginning to notice the material in our minds. If we have the capacity tonight, noticing the physical material as well, physical sensations as well as mental experiences. And this can be in the form of a check-in, asking ourselves, how are we doing? What are we feeling? Naming these experiences. So we're just seeing and naming. That's the first two steps. So we see it, how we're doing, what we're experiencing, naming those experiences. We move into the third stage of the practice, just recognizing that these experiences are happening in my mind, in my body, that they're not necessarily yours, but they're happening as part of your experience, your body and mind. Now we'll move into allowing ourselves to experience this material. And we just focus on one thing, or you can move from one thing to another, but really I would just recommend just one thing, just choosing one material that you've seen and noticed and named. When we experience, we just allow that material to have space. So we notice, so basically we're not reacting to that material. And then that opens up a kind of a feeling. We begin to feel what this material is. We feel the comfort or the discomfort. We would say in mindfulness or the Satipatthana, the feeling tones. Does this feel neutral, maybe? Neither comfortable or uncomfortable? And can we get curious about what we're feeling? So can we focus on different expressions of what we're feeling? Sometimes, as an example, right now I'm feeling a lot of tiredness, fatigue. I've named that, and I'm feeling it. And as I feel it, I'm actually looking at the ways this experience of fatigue or tiredness is showing up. So I can feel the heaviness of my eyes. I can feel certain kinds of energy moving through my body that feels really depleted. I can feel the fatigue of different parts of my body that I know need to be rested and cared for. So this is the feeling. And sometimes it's neither comfortable or uncomfortable. It's just an experience. It's just a sensation. So we can transition now into actually letting go. So it's backing out of this intentional curiosity, this intentional filling into, and actually giving more space to the material that we've been experiencing. And so essentially I am resting back into the spaciousness around the material itself. And it's not to say that you don't 100% give up the experiencing of the material, but what you're kind of resting is this intent to experience everything, or to experience this particular material itself. So your intent in this moment is just to turn your mind, your attention back into the spaciousness. And the last bit of the practice that I love to do is what I call letting it float. So it's just this added intention, or just a reminder, just to keep things floating within the space, that there is space, and that these sensations, these materials, can continue to float within that space. I'm still beginning to transition out of the practice now. Just coming more back into the space. So if our eyes were closed, beginning to open our eyes slowly. Beginning to just awaken the body by moving through some simple movements. You know, just some stretching. It's really nice, really helpful. Just stretch it out. Stretch it up. Stretch it to the side. Do a little crescent kind of stretch here. Opening up the side. There's a way to say the side chakras. You say that there's joy chakras running up and down the side of the body. So when you get space and stretching there, they activate. They've never activated for me, but I've heard from my teachers that they do. If there's joy chakras happening, believe me, it's not on the side of my body. Can I get an amen? And so, dedicating the merit, the energy of this practice to the liberation of all beings, right? Dedicating this energy and saying that because of this practice, I want all beings to be free. That whatever I've accumulated, whatever energy I've created, I give it away. And you don't get depleted when you do this. This is another form of like sympathetic joy practice, where we're bringing attention to an energetic experience. And all we're saying is that this experience is limitless. Stepping into that perspective, and then that experience just expands. So it's like you don't give it away, but it's like flame on, like you just start glowing. But you're the source, and you're still enjoying that, but you're allowing your little light to shine. Okay, does anyone have any questions? I'm just put those into whatever is appropriate. Right. Well, I hope everyone is taking care, doing what you can to take care of yourself right now. And I hope that includes setting boundaries. I hope that also includes letting go of the things you don't need to be doing right now. I really encourage people right now to just like shut down. This is winter, right? And we really are not living in accordance with the seasons. And that's part of our disembodiment and our trauma in this body and society. We're not tuned into the seasons. And this winter, we really have to let go of extraneous things. There are things, yes, we have to do. Like we have to work, we have to take care of people, we have to do whatever it is. We all have to do that. And there are other things that we do not need to be doing. And so we need to let go of that and really do whatever we can, to rest, right? To rest, to practice, to conserve energy. Because the spring is coming, the awakening. This is hibernation, death, rest. And when the spring comes, like we're coming into newness, to awakenness, to a certain flow of energy. But if we don't protect our energy, and the winter is going to be really hard to awaken in the spring. It's so helpful to realign ourselves with the seasons again, which means that we're realigning ourselves with the earth. you know, and we realign ourselves with our bodies. So resting, protecting our energy, eating well, um, hydrating, luxuriates, luxuriates, right? So you need to get luxurious. What does that mean? It's a form of self-care, which means it's about stepping into abundance. Like where's your abundance at? Um, Abundance for me has been often a very autumn practice, a fall practice. It means the harvest. The harvest comes in, you have an overabundance. That abundance is meant to get us through the winter, right? Traditionally, the harvest gets us through the winter. But right now in our personal lives, like what are the harvests that we can still partake in? What are the things that we can still cultivate that seem rich and luxurious and full? And owning that and doing that and saying, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get luxurious. I'm going to get abundant. I'm going to get rich, right? Like a sugary, warm, crusty, like peach cobbler, like that kind of like something like that. That's what when I think about richness and warmness and butteriness and sugariness and and stickiness, right? I think about like a good dessert, right? How do we become like a really good dessert and get really rich? Have you ever just gotten like if you've ever been in a restaurant, you ordered a dessert. Now being back south, now being back home, it's just like the food is just so rich, which I love. But so it's like for me, it's like going and like ordering, some like again, which I said, which is like some type of dessert, like a good piece of pound cake or, a good scoop of like peach cobbler or like sweet potato pie, like that richness, and you taste it, you're like, oh, this is too much. It's sweet, it's buttery, it's hot, it's gooey, and just owning that and just saying, yeah, I like that. It's okay to experience richness, to taste that richness, because that it feels restorative for us. And so many of us are so depleted right now, so drained. It's just so much. Like we're so overtapped, and we have to replace that energy in so many different ways. But you have to figure out what that is for you, basically. You have to figure out what that is for you. The world is still full of richness and beauty and love and fierceness and fabulousness and sassiness, but we have to rediscover that. We have to rediscover that, even in a pandemic, even with so much death and instability and struggle, and hate and discontent. We can still rediscover that for ourselves. And we can embody that and remind others to do that work for themselves as well. Okay. Well, I guess this is it. Thank you all so much for your practice. And we will continue. You all know the schedule. If you're around, join me tomorrow night, late tomorrow night, if you're on the East Coast. I'll be doing a dialogue on love and rage with my really good friend, Charles Stevens, who's in Atlanta, who's like a really well-known Black gay community organizer, and runs an organization for Black gay men called the Counter Narrative Project. And we've known each other since we were students and undergrads, so over 20 years now. Almost 20 years, not over 20 years, almost 20 years now. But we're going to be doing a dialogue, and that's on our website and somewhere, so you can find that somewhere. So I'm excited about that. So there'll be 7 o'clock Pacific time, so 10 o'clock if you're on the East Coast. So it's going to be a little bit of a late night tomorrow for those. But yeah, it'll be fun. I'm really looking forward to it. And besides that, my website, I'm starting Love and Rage up again as well. Love and Rage 2.0. That's starting next month. And so you can register for that. It's a whole completely revamped course. If you took it the first time, it's going to be really a different course this time around. So everything is a lot more professional. So it's not me sitting in front of a camera recording video. So it's professionally produced videos with a team here in Atlanta. And really, it's a longer course, so it's 7 weeks this time. A lot more engagement, a lot more practice, a lot more organization around how we're sharing practices. Please also, before I forget, the audiobook, get your copy of the audiobook of Love and Rage as well, which I think is out now. I'm not for sure. I really don't ever know what's happening professionally in my life. I'm just trying to wake up every day and get through the day, without losing and cussing people out, which is a lot easier to do now. Now I'm back in the South because there's a lot more ignorant people. Anyhow, so please just check websites and everything. And I have a brand new 10% Happier podcast out with Dan Harris, which I think is good, which addresses our current state of things. So I think that's great. Yeah, I'm going to be offering a skincare. Well, I'm going to offer a skincare line probably, before not too long. But there will be a skincare workshop in Love and Rage 2.0 as well. Because skincare is self-care, friends. So if you haven't learned anything tonight, I want you to take that piece of wisdom out. Skincare is self-care. And everything with Bhumisparsha as well. Check that out. Yeah, it is really great this week. It's intense. It's probably the most intense. This is probably I'm the new crisis teacher for 10% Happier. So whenever shit happens, they know they can call me and I'll just tell it straight up. But yeah, we did, Black Lives Matter last summer and the book, that was intense. And we did election night in November. That was intense. And we did this last week for the coup. Okay, so that's it. So thank you all so much. And we'll put up the schedule for the rest of the talks on Wednesday nights as well. So we'll keep these going pretty regularly, and other members of the community will going to come forward and hold space for this as well. They don't pay me anything at 10% Happier. Podcasts don't pay, actually. It's so weird. I don't even listen to podcasts, actually. That's also another thing. I just don't. I listen to audiobooks. I just don't listen to podcasts. I don't know. I I don't know what the whole deal is for me. Um, yeah, podcasts don't pay. That's not a thing. Actually, there's some podcasts that ask like guests to pay. Yeah. I'm not going to name any podcasts, but there used to be a very, 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 very popular podcast in the progressive radical community last year that would ask guests to pay to be on the podcast. I'm not going to name any names. Let's just say they're no longer around. It's not about talking shit, but they're no longer around. Um, yeah, yeah. Um, People do make money off of podcasts. Guests don't make the money off of podcasts. You know? But everyone has a podcast. Everyone's a podcast producer or a DJ or a yoga teacher or a mindfulness teacher or in an open relationship or something. Am I just naming myself? I don't know. Anyhow, um, let's just see. Is there anything else um, that should offer? Yeah. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining. And I will see you all again. Definitely Monday from Medicine Buddha. So if that's something you like, please join us on Monday night for that practice. It's a really nice practice community. All right, so everyone be well, take care of yourself, and I will see you soon at some point, okay? Be well.